Good evening and welcome to the March 13th meeting of the Civil Service Commission. And we have roll call, please.
Commissioner Gantis,
Present.
Commissioner Hatamian,
Here.
Chair Devine,
Here.
and for the record, Commissioners Manukian and Gazarian are not here yet.
Okay. What is the next item, please?
Minutes,
We're going to have to hold off on the minutes till they get here, so we'll move on to the next item.
oral communications,
Okay, I have no cards. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address the commission on items not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move to the next item, please.
recruitment and examination report.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is an item about our it's note and file, our recruitment and selection activity. You see we have roughly 2 pages of recruitments, and these are all the various recruitment processes that are currently at one stage or another. You'll see at the top of the list is the executive recruitment for Chief Information Officer. We had a successful process which we ran last week, and at this point the finalists will be then set up to meet with the city manager for a final decision. Additionally, we have I would say a bit of a slight uptick in recruitment processes from previous months. You'll note in the community services and parks area we have a lot of the positions that we hire for the summer, recreational series, the pool management series, and the lifeguard series are under recruitment at the moment. So other than that, again, it's a fairly steady recruitment load. If you have any questions about this report or any individual process, please ask, and I have the staff here who can probably assist with that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Doyle. Is there any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item, please.
Presentation on Verdugo Fire Communications Center.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, or members of the Commission, we're very pleased to have this presentation this evening on the city's Verdugo Fire Communications Center. As you know, it is a multi-agency joint powers agreement which was established back in the 1970s. A very successful model for regional teamwork in the public safety realm, and just a very good example of working together with our neighboring cities to provide a service, a very specialized service, and a very successful delivery. Today we have actually Chief Scoggins is here, and Don Wise. Don is the executive administrator for the Verdugo Fire Communications Center, and they'll be making this presentation. This item, if you recall, was recommended by Commissioner Gantis a few months ago. I think upon reading about the LA City model and how that system contrasts with ours. Felt
And the county. I think the county also.
Absolutely. We felt it would be good to describe our process and showcase what we do. So with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Mr. Wise, and we'll start it from here.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Doyle.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Weiss.
Good evening,
Good afternoon
members of
or
the
evening.
Commission.
Welcome. We're all ears.
Glad to be here. I'm going to give you a short presentation of where Verdugo Fire Communications really started, and it really started with some good information from the Glendale fire communication system back in the day in the early 30s. And I'm going to take you forward a little bit and go from there. So a little bit of history here is the Glendale Fire Department had a fire alarm box system back in the 1930s. And communications back then, you would run down the street and hit that fire alarm box and push the button or ring the bell, and that would cause the alarm to arrive at the central dispatch center. As you can see, the communications operator there back in the day, she wore a very fancy little uniform there, and that was circa 1930. And you can see the Gamewell alarm system there, a bunch of knobs and dials and vacuum tubes that helped drive the system. And then the paper tape rolls really identified how that call was arriving at the location, and they would decipher that. So Glendale is known for keeping their equipment a long time. This one is circa 1952, so here we are almost 22 years later, and we still see the game well system still in play. And we see one of the battalion chiefs pointing to a drum there, and that's a drum showing where all the alarm boxes were at each corner, and they would use that to help locate where people were calling from. So very involved process just to make that happen. And again, the game well system there with the folks operating it. That's Francis Liburn, circa 1960, operating the two-way radio. And Glendale was one of the first agencies in the West Coast to actually have a two-way radio system. And we've gone forward since then with a lot of state-of-the-art equipment. The buttons and knobs in front of her showed her how to figure out the status of the equipment once they were dispatched. So she would turn a knob to indicate whether a unit was en route or on scene or unavailable for a call. And that board was manual and it would light up, and that's how she maintained her status. And you can see in the early 1970s, 1969, 1970, the game well system is still there a little bit, but they're using the cord boards to answer the phone call. And they're keeping everything in a hand ledger. So a little bit of history there. 1979, there was change that occurred. Burbank, Glendale, and Pasadena, back in the day, they each had their own fire communication center. And the fire chiefs at the time came together and they said, we've got an idea. We can share some resources, both communications frequencies and specialized apparatus. We can get our fire hydrants to be the same threading so that when we arrive at a fire in somebody else's jurisdiction, we attach our hose, it'll actually work. And they went forward with that idea, but they went forward with the idea of a communication center. So they came together, and Verdugo Fire Communications was formed in August 1st, 1979, and sited here in Glendale. And clearly there was a lot of benefits. It was the best use of available resources, shared resources such as the specialized apparatus like the hazmat unit and the air light utility unit, and it combined the available frequencies, the radio frequencies that were available back then, the VHF and UHF frequencies. And this, of course, lessened firefighter risk and increased their safety. It also decreased response times because it was getting the closest apparatus to a fire or a medical incident, and it allowed for sharing of resources. It was really the first localized concept of actually making that happen. And it also brought in some automatic aid agreements and some mutual aid agreements, and automatic aid being the fastest response possible as opposed to mutual aid, which is a slower response. Mutual aid meant that the folks would have to call a battalion chief if they wanted a fire engine from another agency. And of course that caused things to slow down. And this, of course, led into a reduction of the number of agreements that we had in place back in 1979 as well. So other benefits were obviously bringing in skilled dispatchers who could do fire and EMS pre-arrival instructions and skilled in the particulars of doing fire and EMS dispatching and communications. Call takers providing EMD instructions, such as delivering children over the phone. We've done that over the years, in addition to doing some CPR over the phone and having a few saves there. So, but mostly to get people to calm down and just do something.
Delivering children on the phone?
We sure have.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
For a second.
Folks that have gone into labor, and
Okay,
we
I'm
give
sorry.
them emergency medical dispatch instructions over the phone, enough that they can deliver, the husband is delivering the child for his wife until the paramedics get there. So
Wow.
we've had a few of those over the years. Geographic coordination of the 12 fire departments that we serve, fast access to Region 1 and CalEMA resources using ROS. Verdugo uses a nationwide computer system called ROS, which allows us to really order anything that we need should we run out of resources in our local area. And we don't do things alone, obviously. We need help from our neighbors. We need help from other jurisdictions and other regions, and that goes up to the state level and then to the federal level. So we have access to that. And of course, we're a state-of-the-art radio, telephone, and communication system. So what we look like today is since the three agencies came together, we started doing contract dispatching services. And in 1996, we contracted with San Marino and South Pasadena. And since then, we've brought on an additional 8 agencies for a total of 13, our most recent being the Bob Hope Fire Department. So 12 cities, 12 municipalities, and the Bob Hope Airport Fire Department on board. And this is what we look like now for a geographic perspective. Quite a large area there. We're housed in a state-of-the-art fire station on the 3rd floor. And the communication center looks a little bit like command and control. And my joke is often that in our spare time we launch missiles for the government, but we just don't tell anybody that. So statistics. Population served a little over 820,000, combined property value about $103 billion, 134 square miles, and since inception over 1,200,000 incidents dispatched. So quite a bit of activity for what we do. And again, more statistics here, and this represents our emergency phone call volume versus our CAD dispatch call volume, the red being the number of phone calls arriving per hour over the course of 1 year, calendar year 2012, versus the dispatched blue lines, and the difference there is generally about 48%. And what I mean by that is, for example, a brush fire may create just one incident, but behind that there are 300 phone calls. And not all of them are attached to a CAD incident. So therein lies the figure. That's also a good bell curve. And if you think about it, this is a bell curve that identifies a bedroom community. So folks are going to bed about 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening, and they're remaining pretty quiet throughout the evening. And then about 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, as the daily life activity starts to ramp up again, we start to see that natural bell curve happen. If we were in New York City or Las Vegas, I can tell you that that would not be a bell curve. It would be almost flat. And so we're kind of happy that we have a bell curve. Folks are going to bed at night. We also monitor our statistics for workload classification by classification, and whether the fire communications operators are doing more than the fire communication shift supervisors are doing more than the fire comm operators in call taking and dispatching. And we've had a few vacancies in the last year. So we've had some crossover where our shift supervisors worked a little overtime, and it reflects in this activity that they're doing a little dispatching where we would not normally see that. But they're helping out with covering the communication center staffing until we get up to full staffing, which I can say recently we just brought in 4 new hires, and they're working out very well for us. So. And then we also have the call volume for the agencies that we serve. And as you can see that Burbank, Glendale, and Pasadena have the majority of the call volume in the area. And that number is not decreasing. So right around 17,000 for Glendale. I'm sorry. Yeah, 17,000 for Glendale, a little over 17,000 for Pasadena, and for Burbank, almost 10,000. So, and that's across calendar years 2010 to 2012. What I'd really like to home in on, though, is that we measure our performance. Our performance is based on a standard, National Fire Protection Agency or Association. And I get a question every now and then, which is, Don, why don't you use averages? Well, when it comes down to performance, there's no standard for averages. And we don't mix averages and percentiles. Those are 2 different formulas altogether. And it would just really confuse folks. So we adopted the National Fire Protection Association Standard 1221 in absence of a standard for averages. And their criteria is actually used by the insurance services offices to help rate the class protection surveys for fire departments. And in fact, we just finished one for Glendale, and the results from our most recent survey and our performance actually helped them with their Class 1 rating. So we're happy about that. So I'm going to kind of walk you through here what the performance criteria is. Ring time is the amount of time that it takes to answer a phone call in the communication center. And the first criteria is that we must answer within 15 seconds 95% of the time. And as you can see, for calendar years 2010 through 2012, we're doing very well there. We actually beat the goal consistently. The next one is how often do we answer within 15 and 40 seconds, and the criteria there is that we must do that 99% of the time. And so there's the goal again of NFPA 99%, and of course we're doing that 100% of the time across all 3 years. And then finally, percent in excess of 40 seconds, and it's 0%. That's an important metric for me because it goes to how much staffing we have in the communications center and whether they're answering the calls in a timely manner or not. And clearly they are. And this includes a wind event in 2011, and I think you remember that, where we were significantly impacted. And in a normal 48-hour period of time, we would probably dispatch and handle just several hundred phone calls over a 48-hour period of time. That 48-hour period, November 30 into December 1, we handled over 3,400 phone calls and dispatched over 1,500 incidents. And we still retained our ring time of 100% there. So that gives you an idea as to how quickly we're answering calls and the performance within the communication center. Ring time matched is also the same criteria, but what we're doing there is we're actually matching the phone call to a dispatched incident. And you'll see the totals lower from, say, 127, 128,000. They lower down to about 59,000, 60,000 calls. And that's, again, where I stated earlier that there may be one incident but 300 phone calls, but we can only match up one phone call to the incident. So that's why that number comes down. And then, of course, our dispatch processing time is the third criteria, and processing time there changes a little bit. We're supposed to be processing calls within 60 seconds 90% of the time. And in calendar year 2010, when we first started really looking at NFPA 1221, we were at 52%. And we got quite significantly better in 2011. And then in calendar year 2012, we're meeting that goal 84% of the time. The next criteria is percent processed within 60 and 90 seconds. We're supposed to be doing that 99% of the time. Calendar year 2012, we're at 97%, and in 2011 we were at 92%. And so that is obviously a great increase there, and we've improved. That was a combination of training and awareness. And then another thing happened between 2010 and 2011. We changed data providers. The state 911 office gives us our 911 data, and they switched providers, and we're now getting a better set of data, a higher amount of data to work with. So that's changed our numbers. Additionally, we created a new benefit for the fire stations in getting the folks out the door quickly, and they're now being pre-alerted at the time that the call is being entered for dispatch. So that's their new dispatch time, if you will, and we're no longer waiting on the vocal dispatch. They're getting enough information through data to get going and get out the door. And by using that pre-alert, we've certainly improved our time. So we're really missing the mark just 3% of the time for calendar year 2012. Very happy about that.
So are we.
And then, of course, we don't do anything without people. And some of the photos of our folks that are working in the comm center, and they range from anywhere right now from 4 weeks on the job all the way up to well over 30 years on the job. So quite a bit of experience. And as I touched on just a moment ago, it's more than just us. We recognize that we don't do it alone. We rely on the cooperation of others. We see the bigger picture. And when it comes down to doing that, say, responding to the brush fire in Malibu, we're ready for that. And to give you an idea as to where we sit in the middle of things, you'll see how Verdugo looks with all of the colored area. But all of the green fire stations are LA City and LA County fire stations. And obviously we do quite a bit with automatic aid, mutual aid in those areas when they draw down, and vice versa. They will come in and quickly help us should we draw down. So it's a very cooperative effort, and it works out very, very well for us. So that is really, in a nutshell, what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. Would appreciate any questions you might have.
Mr. Manoukian.
Well, first of all, on behalf of the community, we really, really appreciate the level of professionalism that our fire department and it's reflected off these numbers. You know, for all the people that like to take cheap shots out there and are uneducated as far as to the numbers, they speak for themselves. And that's first comment. Thank you. And the other question that and you guys might have covered this, I came in late, I apologize. You know, we have the other cities that participate with the dispatch center. And how does that work in the sense of, do you guys also, do they share the burden of the cost, or do we charge rent? Do we, you know where I'm going with this, right?
I do know where you're going with it, and I can tell you that the Tri-City agencies, Burbank, Glendale, and Pasadena, that established the communication center, they operate under a slightly different financial model. It's a weighted model for determining costs. However, the cost for the contract agencies is also based on our M&O and our salaries and benefits, and we ensure that it's a fair number. In fact, we're working with our finance directors on trying to even things out for some of our agencies, because some folks were brought in at a lower rate and some folks are paying a higher rate. So we're looking at actually leveling that off as we speak to create fairness within the system. But it's a very good working model, and we hear very little in terms of complaints of operations or costs. And I can tell you that there's some neighbors south of us that have a much different algorithm, which I don't quite understand, never did, but their costs are significantly higher than ours. So we're proud of what we do and how we do it in the measure that we're doing it.
And this can expand on as you guys continue. Like, if other cities want to join in this process, this is something that...
Absolutely. If folks were able to, really we're not limited by anything but technology these days. So, and the technology is really there these days that we could actually bring on additional agencies should they knock on the door. There's a lot of considerations behind that, obviously, in terms of radio coverage and telephone routing and things of that nature. But you only need the three tools to do the job, and that's telephone, radio, and computer-aided dispatching. And radio today, we're blanketing the LA County area with the ISIS radio system, which we're a part of. And a lot of our agencies fall under that umbrella, so that makes life fairly easy. The 911 system is becoming more and more robust in terms of technology, and we're a part of that. And so really the only remaining factor is doing computer-aided dispatching, and we do that on our own. So,
Thank you.
Mr. Gantis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wise. I share Commissioner Manukian's gratitude for the job done. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Commissioner Manukian, when you had that airplane accident, they actually came out to your house. They were there, weren't they? Not you having the accident that occurred near your house.
I saw the plane right in front of me. So,
but they were out there, and the reaction...
before I could even dial.
So we have a personal experience. I have not had that personal experience, but have heard great things and have been reading, and it's why I brought this here, the issues regarding the City of Los Angeles and the County of Los Angeles and their response times, which are, I think, something south of 99%, if I'm not mistaken. And the fact that they're having some real issues, and I know, having sat here as long as I have and listened and heard, that we are second to none, and I really am very, very appreciative of that. One of the questions that would come to my mind is, while we get the calls and dispatched, generally do we have figures on the arrival after the dispatch and those dispatched to the actual incident itself? Are there figures?
We do have those figures, and they're available in our annual report. And our annual report is available on the Unified Response website.
Okay.
So if you go to unified-response.org, you would find our annual reports, fiscal year, and it goes back a number of years to show where we migrated from averages to the NFPA criteria, and it will show the stair-stepping into that. So those response times are available there as well.
Do we have any idea that today to answer where we are compared to the end, or is that not something you have on the tip of your tongue?
Off the top of my head, it would be there are multiple numbers, so
okay.
And it'd be difficult for me to produce those numbers off the top of my head. Each agency is a little bit different, and I try not to compare agency because geography is different,
That's true.
population is different, urban versus suburban, things of that nature. So,
Could I ask you to go back one slide to the map of the various cities? I note that the red fire stations are called key fire stations as opposed to the orange, which are just fire stations. What is the difference in that?
the difference there is that we look at those fire stations as being geographically important to that agency in providing coverage to the community. And I'll give you an example. The Harvard brush fire in Burbank, where all of the Burbank units were up in the hills fighting the fire. They drew down very, very quickly and exhausted all of the fire stations. And what we will do is we will take Glendale and Pasadena apparatus and we will start moving them that direction to help cover those key stations, those 3 red stations in the center part of Burbank, and provide coverage to the community until they backfill. So, and vice versa. If we were to have an incident in Glendale, we would be covering the key stations there to ensure that the community always has at least an apparatus at that location at any given point in time. And it's a very dynamic process to make that happen. It's a lot of thinking and a lot of strategy, and it can be very complex when you think about it with a lot going on in the communication center.
And why I ask that is looking on the map, I note that there is a significant portion of the northwest portion of Glendale that has one fire station, which is not a key station, but just outside of that is the Burbank station. So that Burbank station, if there's something up near the border, that key station from Burbank is a faster reactor than the Glendale one, which is really the whole reason why we do this. Isn't that a fair statement?
Yeah, it's a fair statement, and we also did something else in 2006. We did a drop borders clause, meaning that Verdugo really sees this system as one system. And yes, you have your geopolitical, your jurispolitical boundaries, but for us in the Communications Dispatch Center, we will bring Burbank in automatically to Glendale. We will bring Glendale automatically into Burbank on certain incidents. And so we don't have to call a battalion chief anymore. It's automatic for us, and we're dispatching the closest apparatus to the incident wherever and whenever possible.
Which in those hillside communities, northwest Glendale, northeast Burbank, which are really hilly,
right.
This is a significant deal for them in terms of response time and life saving. And these dispatches include, if necessary, the paramedic units as well. Isn't that correct?
Exactly.
Well, I have always been, and I am continue to be blown away by the efficiency. One other issue, you went through the fact that we've had a lot of vacancies. The job of a dispatcher, as I recall, is a pretty high-stress job, isn't it?
Very high stress. In fact, the reason that we had vacancies last year is we had 2 folks that we hired that did not make the training process. I don't believe that they understood what the nature of the job was. And from there, we had a 3rd individual that retired out and moved back to Wisconsin with her husband, and then a 4th was a separation. So wasn't great timing for us, but we since have done a recruitment and filled those 4 vacancies, and we now have 4 folks in training, and they're doing very, very well. So it is a high-stress job. Not everybody can do it. High turnover rate, highly complex with the amount of information that they need to do that job correctly to begin with. And for us, we don't really allow a level of mediocrity in the communication center, and that's not my standard. And I hold my folks to a much higher standard than other comm centers, I think. So.
I'm done. Thank you.
Mr. Gazarian.
Thank you. Sorry I was late. I really wanted to be present during this presentation. I, too, want to thank you on a personal note because my father had an incident a few months ago, and we live 3 miles apart, and my mother decided to call me instead of 911. I said, hang up the phone and call 911. But the 3 miles stretch of land I covered rather quickly. But when I got there, you folks were there, and it was a life or death situation for my father. I'm grateful for that. I have a question that I need to answer because of the numbers I looked at. Processing time means what? It means after the call to send the unit out?
The ring time is the time that it takes for us to answer the call.
Right.
And then the processing time is from the time that we receive the call to the time that folks are dispatched.
Okay.
So that's the processing time. And we are to be meeting that within 60 seconds 90% of the time.
And that's the prelude to my question. On looking on the sheet, my question that I have, the sheet that has the statistics and performance, I note that in 2012 we met the percentage processed within 60 seconds 84% of the time. And leaving that aside, we met 97% of the time allotted for the processing, and the hoped for percentage being 99, we came at 97%. My question is, if I'm to read this chart correctly and the numbers processed at the end of the column indicates 59,289, am I correct in assuming that for every 1,000 processing, if you will, 30 of them did not occur within the 90 seconds?
That would be appropriate.
Okay. That translates roughly to about 160 incidents. I share my fellow commissioners' gratitude, and I don't want to be the critical person. I'm wondering what, if anything, could be done to eliminate the 160 incidents.
I can tell you what's happening.
Okay.
Few things. NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association, is a little bit slow in recognizing certain things. For example, cell phone callers. They don't take that into account.
Okay.
There's no ability to allow extra time for determining a caller's location. And as you know, cell phone calls these days are the biggest use of the 911 system as opposed to a landline. So folks don't know where they are. It takes longer to figure that out. One of the benefits that's coming forward out of the 2013 version of NFPA 1221 is that for certain criteria, we're going to be getting a bit more time, anywhere from 30 to 45 seconds. And we will have new numbers for you at the end of 2013. That will show us a much better benefit here. One of the criteria is emergency medical dispatching, where we're providing pre-arrival instructions. We will get additional time for that. Scenes where, or rather incidents where law enforcement is needed, we need to determine is the scene safe for law enforcement and for the fire and paramedics to arrive, where we want to get a little bit more information. Is the suspect gone? Is the scene safe? Are there any weapons? Things of that nature. We will get additional time for that. The hearing and vocal impaired, we will be getting additional time for that. So they are recognizing certain aspects of the job as needing additional time to process. And so we will see likely this 3% factor go away.
But the 3% factor, as it stands today, takes into account all the calls, including cell phone calls.
Exactly.
Well,
Everything.
that makes it phenomenal.
Everything.
Yes, because I have had instances where I've called 911 from a cell phone, and it's a different concept than calling from a landline. I truly understand that. Thank you. Okay.
You have another question?
Just a follow-up question on Commissioner Gazarian's point, if I know, throughout past several years, we've had tremendous amount of cuts in both fire and police, and we tie our first responders' hands behind their back and we expect them to go battle on certain issues. But the question to follow up on Commissioner Gazarian's, if your staffing level was tried, if we go back closer to where we were, would these numbers, especially on what Commissioner Gazarian was saying, would that improve?
That would be a great question, and I couldn't answer that for you today. If we were originally just the Tri-City agencies and not doing any type of contract dispatching, and we had the staff that we originally had, is that the question?
Yeah.
That would be a great question. I would have no idea at this point.
Okay.
But, yeah.
All right.
I would assume that it would be close.
Thank you.
I have a follow. One thing I think, Mr. Commissioner Manukian, is that one of the big differences cost-wise for us is that our dispatchers are non-sworn employees. They're very trained, but they're non-sworn, whereas I believe in the city of Los Angeles, and I'm not sure about the county, but the city of Los Angeles, their dispatchers are all sworn officers, which I'm sure, as you know, the cost differentials is huge. So I think one of the advantages of what we have is we're able to maybe have more personnel trained just the same way. I mean, you train somebody that are able to do it because they're non-sworn and the pension costs, et cetera. I do have one other follow-up question that I forgot to ask. One of the things is, I'm sure you know, in the news in the last month has been this 911 call in Bakersfield where the dispatcher pleaded with the person in the independent living facility to perform CPR, and that person refused to do so because it was outside the policies of the independent living facility. And I happen to be an attorney, as you know, and involved in a website that, not a website, but a group that emails each other. And one of the interesting points that had come out is the fact that indeed the person did live in the independent living facility and had authorized, and I have an uncle that does live in that I'm caring for, and have signed those documents, that indeed they are not authorized to give an independent living, not assisted living and not skilled nursing facilities. Is this something that our dispatchers are trained on, to know that if it's an independent living facility, that those people are probably not likely to do CPR, not authorized to do CPR?
We have actually run across that in the past, and the facility themselves will identify what their policies are as to whether or not they can pick the patient up or to perform CPR or not. Regardless of that, we still effect a response. Our position is that we want to remove the liability off of the communication center and off of the dispatcher, and we really do continue the dispatch, irrespective of what the facility is stating to us. And we have run across that particular situation in the past, yes. And then that would even include a DNR, do not resuscitate type of an order. So
I'm through.
Mr. Tomian, did you have any comments?
I just have one final comment. I want to parallel the gratitude that my colleagues shared with you and your presentation, and also your department. I have friends who work for Glendale Fire, but I guess what I would like to have seen in the statistics was the response time.
okay.
And that's just because that's the nuts and bolts of police agency, fire agency. Working in civil service myself, working in a law enforcement agency, I know that's the primary thing of our performance measures, and that's what justifies our budget, justifies the way we respond to the community. I do appreciate the fact that you provided the information for us to look up that information, but I also do want to thank you and praise you for the job that your office is doing, the communication center. But I guess the response time was one of the things I was kind of looking forward to in this presentation.
Okay.
I have to be honest.
Next year, we'll get that.
Next year.
See what happens when we have too many attorneys on this panel?
I, too, would like to echo the accolades expressed by my colleagues. I think it's a wonderful job you're doing with, I would say, limited resources. Fortunately for my colleagues, you actually asked the same questions I was going to ask, so we're down to one question from me, and that's, has any thought been given to including the police dispatch into this unit to further streamline the system?
In other words, if I understand you correctly, to combine the communication center for the police agencies?
That's right.
I believe that there was an effort made to do that some time ago. I don't know where that study lives. I don't know what the outcome of that is.
But just from a big picture view, is it a practical thing? Could it be done? It could.
I would say from a Verdugo model.
Here comes the big.
Here comes the chief.
Let me, good afternoon, Commissioners. Let me clarify that answer. There has not been any work done to combine police and fire dispatch, if that's the question that you're asking.
Question.
No, there has not been that effort. We have a big enough animal, kind of on our own, with 13 agencies that we take care of, and dispatching fire and police are two different professions. couple of years ago, I think it was management partners did come in and have that conversation with the police department, but that would be a question that they would have to answer on that front.
Okay, thank you.
And we will also get you copies of Verdugo's annual report from last year, which has a response time for all the agencies that we dispatch for.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I have a follow-up question to the chief on that? When you dial 911, when a person, don't all 911 calls come to your center, or
No.
even police ones?
They all 911 calls go to the police dispatch center. They're the primary dispatching centers, which are called the PSAPs. So they answer the call, and they'll say, is this a fire or medical emergency? If they say fire or medical, they transfer it over to fire. And that's what happens, and we get it after that.
I see.
Only yours goes to a special line, Mr.
Mine
Mayor.
goes to your house.
To a recording.
Goes to your house.
Matt, did you have a,
Thank you.
Matt, did you have a question?
Mr. Chair, I just want to remind the commission that, in spite of the fact that Verdugo does cover 12 cities, the people who staff the Verdugo Communication Center are Glendale city employees, and they do a heck of a job. Our firefighters tend to get, the bulk of the attention when you think of emergency services, but the dispatchers working out of Verdugo do an incredible amount of work, as Fire Chief and Mr. Wise have said. And when he talks about the turnover of the dispatch staff, what I think we're primarily talking about is turnover in that first year during the probation. The dispatchers serve a one-year probationary period, and I can't think of a job anywhere in the city where there is a more challenging and stressful level of training and development for that first initial probationary period. I think once they make it through the probationary period, the workforce is quite stable. I mean, there are people there that I've known for 20 years.
Yes.
But it is outside of perhaps police dispatch. We have really the highest rate of failure of probation in these dispatch professions. So it really is a testament to the talent of the people that we have here, and that they do it so well. So.
Thank you. I'm glad that the chief is up there, because I wanted to recognize and thank him, whose leadership without this would not happen. Would not happen. So, Chief, thank you very much. I think you're doing a fantastic job in running the whole department and putting these pieces together so we have a safe city. So.
I will say thank you, but all the applause should go to the men and women of the organization, the boots on the ground. That's who really take care of the business out in the field each and every day. When that 911 calls comes in, when they dispatch it, there are inspectors who do the prevention work, our public education coordinator who does that for the community. They really do the heavy lifting for the organization. So those applause are for them.
Leadership plays a big role in there.
May I? For the record, I too am an attorney, and reviewing 911 recordings today, I don't have a doubt in my mind. I was doing that today on a case having to do with LAPD and LA Fire. I have no doubt in my mind that separating the fire dispatch from the police dispatch is an actually best approach to issues that come up in the community. And I see, having heard the 911 tapes, how dispatch works very well with one another. While what I was reviewing today had to do with police dispatch, but I also was provided with tapes that cross-reference the paramedics to be sent from the fire dispatch, if you will. So I hope you keep it as is, because I think it is truly two different, distinct mindsets and operations, and I think they work well together. To mix them with one another, I think one or the other will suffer in the process, perhaps. So
I agree.
And I applaud you for everything you've been doing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Mr. Weiss, great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let the record show that Commissioners Gazarian and Manukian have arrived, and we'll go back to the minutes. Do I have a motion for approval of the minutes?
Move to approve.
Second.
And that'll be unanimous. I'm sorry, it'll be a yes from Commissioners Devine, Gazarian, and Manukian. Abstain from Commissioners Atamian and Gaddis. Okay, what is next, please?
Agenda forecast.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this is a note and file item. We have the forecast for the upcoming meetings. We have a meeting later this month, March 27th. As of now, there are no items for the open agenda. However, I will have an item for the closed session and another hearing to be addressed, and I'll discuss that with Mr. Chair. The 10th of April, we have no items as of now, and then the 24th of April, we have a meeting cancellation for that. If you have questions, if you'd like to add or suggest any items for upcoming meetings, I'd be happy to consider that.
Any thoughts or comments on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item.
Reports, past due employee performance evaluations.
Mr. Gaddis.
Thank you. We have no past dues from the city manager's office, the city treasurer's office, community development department, community services and parks department, the fire department. It's too bad the chief left. He could have heard that. Glendale Water and Power, the police department, and the public works department. These are all no past dues. And out of our salaried employee count, of which is now 1493, which is a much lower number, may I add, we have 20 people that are out either first or second notices, which is a fabulous number. And we're very appreciative of them complying at the levels of the supervisories. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Next, please.
Civil Service Commission, staff comments.
Do we have any comments from the commissioners? Seeing none. Staff? Seeing none. Next item.
Closed session for the following items: public employee appointment, similar qualifications transfer, public employee discipline, deliberations.
Okay, we will be going into closed session, and at the conclusion of closed session, we'll be reporting out. However, we will not be on television when we report out. So at this point, we're going to take item 9A on the similar qualification transfer. Anyone not associated with that item, I'll ask you to please sequester yourselves outside for a few minutes while we dispense with that one. And at this point, we will go off camera.